Okay, so today we're going to dive into this book, The Autistic Brain,
Oh, cool.
Temple
Yeah.
Grandin and Richard Panek.
I've heard so much about this one.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And especially, coming from Temple Grandin, who's, not just an author, but also autistic herself.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It's like firsthand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're going to be looking at how autistic brains work and kind of some of the, maybe debunking some myths along the
It
way.
sounds good.
Yeah. So, right off the bat, one of the things that that the book really emphasizes is that autism is a spectrum.
Yeah,
It's not just like one size fits all kind of thing.
definitely. And I think that's like a really important thing for people to understand, right? Because sometimes people think like, oh, if you've met one person with autism, you've met them all.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's so not true.
Yeah, and I think that Grandin does a really great job in the book of using her own experiences to illustrate that.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about how like even just like walking into a grocery store
Mm-hmm.
can be completely overwhelming
Wow.
for somebody with autism because of sensory overload.
Right, right. It's like all those sights and sounds and all the people and yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that, people who don't experience that can always relate to, but she does a really good job of, explaining it in a way that that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's where, her perspective being autistic herself is so valuable
Absolutely.
because she can actually speak to, what that experience is like.
Right. And she ties in the science too.
Yeah.
She doesn't just talk about, you know, her personal experience, but she talks about like the actual like, neurological difference.
Right. The science behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, speaking of science, I mean, there's a lot of brain research in the book.
Yeah.
And some of it, I'll admit, was a little bit, over my head. Like, I'm not a neuroscientist.
Right.
But there was one thing that really stood out to me. And I'm curious, what you thought about this too. But she talks about the connectivity,
Yeah.
the differences in connectivity in autistic
Oh,
brains.
yeah. That was fascinating.
Yeah. And like, she uses this analogy of like uh, highways and local roads.
Okay.
So, like in an autistic brain, it might be that the highways between different regions of the brain are kind of uh, less developed,
Interesting.
but the local roads within each region are like super efficient.
Oh, I see.
So it's like maybe maybe it's harder to kind of get from one part of the brain to another.
Yeah.
But once you're in a particular area, things are working really well.
So that could explain like why sometimes people with autism are really, really good at like very specific things. Yes.
Exactly.
Like, they might have incredible focus, like
Yeah.
on details.
Yes.
But then maybe they have a harder time with like, kind of seeing the big picture or
Yeah.
connecting things from different areas.
Right. And it makes me think about how she categorizes thinking styles too.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
She talks about like visual thinkers and pattern thinkers and verbal thinkers.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was reading that and it's like, okay, wait, which one am I?
Yeah, I know. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Can you give me some examples like of how those different thinking styles might play out?
Sure, sure. So let's say you're putting together a piece of furniture.
Okay.
Right. So a visual thinker might be able to like look at the instructions and just kind of picture it in their head, like
Oh.
see the finished product.
Right.
Whereas a pattern thinker might focus more on uh, the steps, like the sequence of steps,
Yeah.
and how those fit together. And then a verbal thinker might be someone who really needs to like read the instructions carefully,
Yeah.
and follow the words step by step.
That makes sense. So, okay, so we've talked about, the spectrum of autism. We've talked about the brain science behind it.
Right.
But one of the things that I appreciate about Grandin's approach is that she doesn't shy away from the challenges.
No, definitely not.
Like she talks about the social communication difficulties, the sensory overload,
Right.
things that can be really tough for autistic individuals.
Absolutely. It's not always easy.
Right. But she doesn't just like leave it there.
No.
She offers solutions too.
Yeah, she's very practical.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that she suggests?
Well, one thing that really stood out to me was the importance of clear communication.
Okay.
Like when you're interacting with someone who's autistic, avoiding idioms, for example.
Ah, right, because those can be really confusing.
Yeah, exactly. Or sarcasm. Like,
Hmm.
sometimes those things can be misinterpreted.
Right.
And also, breaking down complex tasks into smaller steps
Yeah, that's a good one.
and giving people, time to process information.
Hmm.
Because sometimes, it just takes a little bit longer.
Right. And so it's really about, being mindful of those differences.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
being patient.
Yeah. And I think this whole idea of, understanding and adapting really ties in the concept of neurodiversity, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Which Grandin is a big advocate for.
Yeah, that's one of her key messages, really.
Yeah. So can you explain what neurodiversity is for people who might not be familiar with that term?
Sure. So neurodiversity is basically the idea that neurological differences are, normal
Okay.
and that they're not deficits. They're
Right.
just variations.
Like it's like biodiversity, but for the brain.
Exactly. Yeah. Like just like in nature, you have all these different, species and variations,
Mm.
and they all contribute to the ecosystem.
Right.
It's the same with, neurological
So
differences.
it's not about trying to fix people or make them, more like quote unquote normal.
Right. It's about appreciating the differences.
Yeah. And valuing those differences.
Yeah. And seeing them as strengths.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So what's the impact of this shift in mindset, do you think?
Well, I think it has a huge impact both for individuals and for society as a whole.
Okay.
For individuals, it can be really empowering to view your differences as strengths rather than weaknesses.
Right.
And for society, it can lead to more inclusive environments where
Hmm.
everyone feels valued and can contribute their unique talents.
Yeah. And I think, Grandin specifically talks about how autistic individuals can really thrive in certain fields.
Yes, absolutely.
Like she mentions computer programming, data analysis, engineering.
Right, those are great examples
Yeah.
because those are fields where, attention to detail and pattern recognition and, a deep understanding of systems are really valuable.
Right.
And those are often strengths that autistic individuals have.
So it's about, finding the right fit. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that, people with autism can't do other things,
Right.
but it's about, recognizing that there are certain areas where they might really excel.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, how much potential is being overlooked or wasted,
Yeah.
when we try to force everybody into the same mold.
Absolutely. There's so much diversity out there.
Yeah. So having gone through this book and explored all of this, I'm curious, if you could ask Temple Grandin one question
Oh, wow.
based on, what we've learned today, what would it be?
Hmm. That's a tough one. I think I would ask her how we can create more inclusive educational environments
Okay.
that really cater to different thinking styles and learning preferences.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because, if we could do that, I think everybody would benefit.
Absolutely. I think that's something to really, uh, ponder and think about.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, The Autistic Brain,
Great book.
really fascinating read. I highly recommend it. And until next time, keep diving deep.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.